from the Mutual Broadcasting System. This is STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. Now, retired Marine Intelligence Officer and globally recognized risk expert Hal Kempfer.
Welcome to STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. And what I'm going to discuss today is kind of the ire of the ceasefire failure, or what appears to be a ceasefire failure that's happening in the Gulf with Iran. And not surprising, Iran has always tried to obfuscate, delay, misdirect any type of negotiation process. And so what we're seeing here is a real failure. Well, anyway, let me go back to where we started here. All right. President Trump on April 7th, 2026, announced there was a ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. And this is after more than about a month of war with both U.S. and Israeli strikes all over Iranian targets, taking out Iranian political leadership, military leadership, intelligence leadership, and then going after a lot of other different targets like ballistic missiles, drones, etc. And Iran retaliating, not just aiming at U.S. bases in the region, not just firing missiles and drones over at Israel, but actually attacking pretty much all the Gulf states, all the Arab Gulf states, and Jordan on top of that. And basically going after hotels, oil facilities, natural gas facilities, you name it. They were doing everything. And so it's been a big war. All right. Now, just as a matter of discussion, warring nations can reach ceasefires through a variety of ways. One of the ways is when a very powerful third country insists that the two parties stop fighting because of the risks and damage it's causing to regional stability, world peace, whatever. The problem with this was the United States is one of the warring parties, and there wasn't really a big third party that could step in to do that. However, in a kind of a version of that, one could say Pakistan kind of became the peace broker, or I should say at least the interlocutor that was going on there. Now, in the modern era, the U.S. has played a role doing this. We have stepped in many times, for example, with Israel and Egypt, telling them to stop fighting each other. But in this one, the U.S. is there, and there just wasn't that other country. Russia's not really a big country. It's got an economy smaller than Italy's. China is a big country, but China is our near peer competitor. We're not going to let China step in and really solve anything. And so there really wasn't anybody that was going to step in and do that. But this is this particular ceasefire is kind of a good example of a way that that the parties can kind of agree to quit fighting for a while. But I'm going to kind of caveat that by saying Iran really hasn't quit fighting. They're still, as of today, as I record this, we're into what, day 3? And they're still firing drones into Kuwait. And it looks like they've kind of stopped firing stuff into the UAE, but they were firing for a while. And, occasionally drones and missiles seem to eke out and go hit places, which tells me that they've got some real command and control problems, persistent endemic command and control problems with Iranian forces, which means the regime doesn't really control its own forces. Or they're just not sincere and they're just, curtailing firing, but they're still going after whatever targets of opportunity may pop up. Now, Pakistan certainly deserves some praise for stepping up. It picked up on this, and its prime minister played a critical role in putting this whole thing together. And what this should do with this ceasefire is going to give both sides a couple of weeks to first negotiate maybe an extension of the ceasefire, but also a couple of weeks to kind of, lick their wounds, so to speak, fix things, rearm, do a bunch of other stuff that needs to be done, and then consider our next move, and then work out whatever is going on with Israel and Hezbollah at the same time. The problem is this. The big thing that Iran had to do other than stop firing, was to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The big thing that was hitting every country in the world and hitting the U.S. as well is the fact that oil, natural gas, fertilizer, helium, and other stuff was not coming out of the Persian Gulf. It was blocked. And that is something that Iran has simply not done. They have let a few ships through, but they're still imposing this toll on ships of $2.5 million in cryptocurrency for ships to go in and out. I'll tell you, the mariners, the maritime industry, pretty much, Maersk, and certainly if you look at Lloyd's of London and everybody else, are looking at this going, the risk is too high. We just don't trust the Iranians. They're not pulling through. They're not following through on their agreement. It's also very indeterminate as to whether the primary channels are open. Iran says you got to go up and around Hormuz and Larak Islands and then go through this island toll booth system in order to pay your fee to get passage through. And that's just unacceptable. The risk involved in all this, and at any time you could hit a mine, or the Iranians could change their minds and change attack with a small boat or a midget submarine or a sea drone or an aerial drone or whatever. That everyone's just kind of sitting there and saying we're not going to send our stuff through. So a handful of ships go through every day, but not the 120 to 140 ships that used to go through daily prior to it being shut down. So this is a really big problem. Europe is reportedly only a few weeks away from essentially what will be an oil crisis. And part of this thing with the ceasefire being announced was you saw an immediate drop in the price of oil globally. But as Iran fails to follow through on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, that's going to be a very temporary thing. In fact, what it really does is it opens up the prospect for runaway price increases, because now the market is looking at this saying, we're not sure there can be a diplomatic solution for reopening the strait, and we're not sure if the strait will be open anytime soon. So the price of oil and natural gas and everything else will be factored in that new reality. So it's kind of putting everything, the global markets, in a much worse place, and global supply chains in a worse place. Places like the Philippines are right now within 2 or 3 weeks of literally running out of gas. And so they need those ships out of the Gulf now, steaming across the Indian Ocean over to the Philippines. They don't need it. If it's a week or two late, they're going to go on severe fuel rationing in the Philippines, and that country is going to cease to function as a regular economy because of it. So whereas the ceasefire announcement was generally very welcome across the global scene, welcome with a variety of world capitals in Europe and the Far East is a positive thing, it was welcome primarily as a way to expediently reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran is just not letting that happen, which makes the value of this ceasefire, whether it's a functional ceasefire or even just the facade of a ceasefire, less attractive every single day. Every day that tankers and other ships can't get in and out of the Strait of Hormuz is a day that this ceasefire and the diplomatic approach to negotiating through this crisis ceases to have much meaning, have much value, and it increases the global propensity to say, look, this can only be solved militarily. And so that's putting pressure. That's putting pressure on all the countries, but it puts a lot of pressure on the United States to find another way to reopen the strait. Now, on April 10th, President Trump texted on his Truth Social platform, quote, Iran is doing a very poor job, dishonorable, some would say, of allowing oil to go through the Strait of Hormuz. That's not the agreement we have. Now, Iran's position is, well, they said in that agreement, their position is that Israel is supposed to stop attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon as part of the ceasefire agreement. Israel and the U.S. have both said that was never part of the discussion. That's just something you threw in. Now, with that said, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, when he announced this thing initially, did include Hezbollah as part of the discussion. So in his mind, he was thinking it was part of the discussion, but the U.S. and Israel do not think it's part of the discussion. So now it's saying that a ceasefire may not break out in Lebanon, and the Lebanese government has indicated they would like to see a ceasefire start before they go into substantive talks with Israel on how to disarm Hezbollah. But they're saying, but basically Israel and the U.S. says there was no ceasefire agreement with Lebanon as part of this. And that gets into the issue of the agreement. There's nobody has an example of whatever this was. We don't even know if there was a written agreement, which seems kind of strange. You have a ceasefire agreement that nobody bothered to actually write down anything. So you have this radical misinterpretations. The U.S. says it looked at Iran's 10 points and said that's a basis for negotiation, but there was no 10 points put forward, and we haven't seen what that was. And so Iran put out the 10 points, and it's right back to its maximalist gains of we control the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. has to pay us reparations for war damages, we're going to keep enriching uranium all we want, and obviously about half of those things are complete non-starters. There's nothing even to discuss with those. So that's a really, really big problem. All right. Now, so the U.S. has a ceasefire that's not functioning. So what does a ceasefire really give the U.S.? Well, there are other ways to look at it. A ceasefire is a time to rearm, reposition, and to get ready to restart offensive military operations. And that may be what a lot of the thinking is with the U.S. Number one, give the Iranians a chance to fail diplomatically on the global stage so nobody will question why this isn't working. And then give the U.S. a chance to put some stuff in place. Now, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit has been in the Gulf of Oman, ready to go for some time. And the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, which was coming out of California, has been steaming across the Pacific, presumably was steaming across the Indian Ocean. And depending on, I don't have any confirmation of this, but they certainly have time to be in the vicinity to do something. So they could be in the Gulf of Oman right now. So that gives 2 Marine Expeditionary Units in the region. That's quite a bit of capability. And the 1st Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division, and I don't know if it's a whole brigade, it might just be 2 battalions, which is still a lot of combat power, is deployed in the Middle East. And so they're ready to go as well. So you have a lot of capability for putting boots on the ground. There's also reportedly a plethora of special operations forces in the region. And when I use the word plethora, that means a lot to me. But there are some significant players out there. Rangers could be in there, Army Special Forces. We saw a rescue operation of a downed aviator that involved reportedly SEAL Team 6 is in there. So presumably we have a lot of special operations capability, which is very important when you're talking about doing potential raids in a maritime environment and for specific target areas. And so there's a lot going on there. Now, what could happen? What can they do? Well, militarily, they could do a lot of things in the Strait. They can do raids. They can go in, take out facilities. They could take out an underground missile village or city, as they call them. They could take out emplacements, deep in the cliffs where they have drones operating or missiles operating, kind of a modern day version of the guns in Aberon sort of thing. That's very possible to do that. Then also there's enough substantive forces there that the U.S. could potentially take islands. Right now, Hormuz and the Rock Island, which are just south of Bandar Abbas, the big port city that sits in the Strait of Hormuz, those 2 islands are basically acting like a toll booth on this cryptocurrency, fee to go through the strait. These are not big islands. All right. Also, if you now Keshem Island, which is that big long island to the north, that is a big island. But just south of Keshem, there's another little island called Hingham, which is not a big island. And so Hormuz, Iraq, and Hingham should have our full attention. Hormuz is not a big island. It's what the Strait of Hormuz is named after. It has an area of about 16 square miles or 42 square kilometers. Sparsely inhabited. Some development has taken place, so there are some built-up areas. And the city of Hormuz in the north of the island has a population of about 6,000. So there is a sizable, not a huge population, but there is a population on the city. Now, Larak Island is a very small Iranian island located off the coast of Bandar Abbas and just east of Keshem Island, south of Hormuz Island. It has a population of about 466 people. And it's interesting when they look at it, they say, and this involves 98 families. That's another way of saying it's a population that has not moved around a lot on that island. They've been there for generations and generations. Now, Hingham Island is further out past the Strait of Hormuz, south of Keshem Island in the Persian Gulf. It is about 36 kilometers wide. It's kind of shaped like a truncated cone and has a population of about 615 people that live in 3 villages. So even though it's a pretty good size, it's not a huge island, but it's a pretty good size island, there's just not that many people who are there. Now, Keshem Island is huge. That's got a population of nearly over 140,000 people. It's really long. It's very mountainous. It would take a very sizable force to take Keshem Island. That's one where if we were going to go into Keshem Island, we would want to probably have the Saudis and maybe UAE with us as an occupation force. And I think with all these islands that we should be, if we're not now, we should be talking to the Saudis and UAE and maybe some other countries once we go in there and seize the island, handing it over to our Gulf allies to basically occupy that terrain while we take our forces and re-embark aboard ship and go off and do the next big operation. So Keshem is there, but I would point out that Keshem is supposed to have a lot of underground facilities, a lot of drone and missile facilities, anti-ship missiles, stuff like that. But if Hingham and Hormuz and Larak Islands are all controlled by the U.S., we could easily put a lot of capabilities on those islands to rain fires, if you will, rain missiles like HIMAR missiles and other things down on the heads of those facilities, those emplacements on Keshem Island, so we could literally control the island by fires. That would be an option. Now, the MUs, Marine Expeditionary Units, they're a combined arms thing. They can come in by air, they can come in by sea. They've got large hovercraft to bring stuff in. They've got amphibious, fighting vehicles that can bring troops in. They can do a lot of different things. They can, tilt rotor aircraft. They got a lot of different ways to bring in their forces, and they could easily take some of these islands. The airborne battalions of the 82nd could obviously parachute in, hence the term airborne, and or they could use vertical lift like helicopters or tilt rotor aircraft to come in and take the islands. One of the things the 82nd Airborne and all of its battalions are somewhat famous for are doing what they call advanced airfield seizures. That's where they go in and they parachute into an airfield at night and they seize the airfield. They are probably the best in the world at doing this, along with the Rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment, who are also really, really good at advanced airfield seizure. And I'm assuming there's Rangers in the area or Rangers that we could quickly deploy to the area. Now, further out up into the Gulf, there are some small islands called Abu Musa, Greater Toom, Lesser Toom. These are really small islands, and these are the ones that the UAE claims as their sovereign territory that have been controlled or been controlled by Iran since 1971, when the Shah just simply seized these islands by force. Obviously, they're so small that with everything else going on, I could see us doing a joint operation with the UAE to seize Abu Musa, which is the biggest of them, and then maybe just letting the UAE go in and seize the 2 Toom Islands as well. And then if you go further up the Gulf, you got Kark Island, where 90% of Iraq's oil comes out of. That's the one that earlier in the week we bombed again to hit everything that we could see that was foreseeably a military-type position on the island. And I'm assuming that we have devastated the military positions and the military structure on the island. That would be a bigger fight. That island is full of oil infrastructure, not surprisingly. So there's a lot of chance that if there's any fighting on that island, you could end up having some horrific fires and stuff, to say the least. But it is very vulnerable. And it's one where it's got a big airfield, and I could say that big airfield is probably very susceptible to advanced airfield seizure by the 82nd or maybe the Rangers or something like that. So there are a variety of ways that these things could be taken. And then they could be basically turned into island fire bases for shooting onto the mainland or shooting onto Keshem Island or shooting onto Bandar Abbas or whatever. It would provide us a nearby platform for putting HIMARS and stuff in. So my recommendation would be if we go in there, we bring in a lot of supporting arms on those islands with a ton of ammunition and just start using that proximity to reduce everything that we can range that would obviously take out a lot of things that they could range. And that would be an option. So, long story short, President Trump has options in place. In fourth-generation warfare parlance, a ceasefire is not necessarily a prelude to peace. That's kind of a diplomatic thing, which is to get a ceasefire in place, then you start working on a long-term peace agreement. In fourth-generation warfare, a ceasefire is just what it sounds like, a temporary pause in active military operations. And that provides time to do a lot of other things. Now, some of these things I've already mentioned, like rearming, repositioning, things like that. Another thing that I didn't talk about was gaining intelligence dominance, using that time to do a focused, intense intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance effort to identify where they are, what they're doing, what are at those places, and then work through the solution of how we can hit those targets when fighting resumes. And hopefully that is exactly what we're doing with the ceasefire time right now. I am thinking that was probably some of the justification that was given at the highest levels as to why we might want to do a ceasefire. And so when things begin again, we do much more targeted strikes when things kick up. Now, unless Iran opens the Strait of Hormuz, it is losing what little leverage it currently holds. So even if there's a diplomatic desire to keep things going or to not shut down the ceasefire, the simple economic reality is that the ceasefire is not working for the global economy. Until the strait is open and until shipping is going in and out of the strait at somewhere near or above where it was when things kicked off, economically, this ceasefire doesn't work. And if it doesn't work economically, eventually politically, this ceasefire doesn't work. And so Iran really has a lot to consider on this. They're going to lose what little leverage they have. And the U.S. has more options now than it did, say, a week ago or 2 weeks ago in terms of what they can do. All right. Thanks for listening to STRAT. And please visit stratpodcast.com. You can go to my YouTube channel at Hal Kempfer TV. You can also go to my website, Global Risk Intelligence and Planning, SA, GRIPSA.com. And then also, if you want to hear me talk about maritime choke points and some of the supply shocks that we're seeing around the world, on May 5th, I'm doing a special 2.5-hour webinar for Los Angeles InfraGard chapter. And you can go online at the Los Angeles InfraGard website, which is www.infragardlosangeles.org. And you can register for that. And hopefully you'll have a chance to get a chance to spend some time and really look at maritime choke points and spend some more in-depth time thinking about some of these supply shock or supply threats that we see coming out of it. Thanks for listening to Strat, and I hope you listen to the next one.